All right, so for this game, we have what is largely a sequencing game. We have 7 positions to work with, or 7 hours, so we'll set it up accordingly. We just have 1 through 7. The elements themselves, though, we only have 5 bands, so there's a bit of an irregularity here. The 5 bands, for the record, are L and R, S, Y. But in addition to these 5, we essentially have 2-hour-long breaks, which is how we get up to 7 positions. So I guess we can just add these as extra elements. We're going to have 2 Bs on the board somewhere. Beyond that, there's not really much restriction on kind of how that would work, so we can just go straight into the rules. So the first rule tells us that the second break cannot immediately go after the first break. So basically that just means that the 2 breaks, they cannot be consecutive. They can't be next to each other. Next, Y has to go at some point before the first break. So I guess we can say that Y has to go before B1. Next, S has to go at some point before R. So again, I guess we can say S is before R. Next, N has to go either immediately before or immediately after R. So, I mean, we already have R on the board, so we can kind of combine these rules together, and we can say that R and N are going to have to be consecutive, but we don't quite know the sequence between them, so we'll just put a little double-sided arrow to show that they can flip. And lastly, L has to go in 7, so that's kind of nice to know. 7 has to be L, and of course we can plug that right into the board. Now, in terms of, well, it's worth noting that in this game, I mean, we have L, I mean, we only have 5 people to work with. L is taken care of, and the other elements, they're all kind of embedded in these 2 rules, right? That's Y, S, R, and N. That's everybody else. Now, since that's everybody else, first of all, I guess it's worth noting that the first position really has to be one of these 2. It can only be Y or S, so that's a nice start for position number 1. But in terms of kind of how the breaks would work, let's talk about the RN block, because I mean, it's going to be a 2-person block. And it feels like we don't actually have that much flexibility with the RN block. So for example, we can't really place the RN block into 2 and 3. Because if we did, if the RN block goes into 2 and 3, then S is going to go 1, obviously, because S has to go before. But then what are you left with? You're just left with Y before B1 and B2. So you're just going to have Y, B, B, but the breaks would then be next to each other, which isn't cool. So that couldn't work. I don't think we can even do the RN block in 3 and 4, because if we do the RN block in 3 and 4, then yeah, the Y can't go into 5 because Y, B1 leaves you with no room for the other break. But if you put Y early, if you put the RN block here, and then you're going to have S and Y in 1 and 2, you're right back at the same spot. You're going to have the 2 breaks next to each other in 5 and 6. So it really seems like, I think 4 and 5 could work. If we do the RN block in 4 and 5, then the second break could go into 6. And then you can kind of just shuffle around Y before B1 and S. Or the RN block could go into 5 and 6. And then we could do something like the breaks could go, say, into 2 and 4. And then the Y could go into 1 and S could go. So yeah, that could work. So since we only have 2 major plays for the RN block, let's exhaust. And remember, you don't need a good reason to exhaust. You just need an excuse. And having a 2-person block that only has 2 major plays, that's a pretty good reason. So we can say either the RN block's going to go into 4 and 5, or it's going to go into 5 and 6. Now, top scenario, as we said, the second break is going to have to go into 6 since there's nothing else that can really go there. And then beforehand, I suppose we have a little bit of flexibility, right? Because we could have something like Y and 1, and then S and your first break could kind of flip. Or you could have S and 1, and then you could have Y and then B1, and that would work as well. So we have a little bit of movement there. Now, in the bottom scenario, actually, what we said earlier, that kind of would have to happen, wouldn't it? Because your 2 breaks, the breaks can't start on number 1 because we have to have Y before the first one. And then the only way to separate the 2 breaks would be to have them go into 2 and 4. So break 1 would have to go here, and break 2 would have to go there. But if that's true, Y has to go before B1, so it's going to go into 1, and then S would go into 3. So that's pretty good. So I guess with that, let's take a look at the questions. So question number 1 is our standard excluding question, so we do this by the rules. First rule is that the breaks cannot be next to each other. Let's see if anything violates that. So A looks good, B is fine, C is good, so are D and E. So I guess we can't do anything with that. Next, the second rule, Y has to go before the first break. So A easily gets disqualified since Y is after, and the rest of these have Y in 1, so that's fine. Next, S has to go before R at some point. So B has S after R, that is not cool. C, that works. D, that works. And E, yeah, S is before R, we're good. Next, we were told that N and R basically have to be consecutive. So between C, D, and E, C is legit, D is fine, E has R and N separated. That does not work, so we can get rid of answer choice E. And lastly, L has to go 7, and D obviously violates that, which leaves us with C as the best answer to question number 1. I guess as usual, let's just quickly plug that into the board. So we have Y, break number 1, and then we have S and R, and then break 2 with L, which for the record, it's worth noting, this would perfectly fit into that first template. Anyways, let's take a look at the questions. Now, to be honest, we have a pretty good exhaustion, so let's just do these questions in sequence as they come. So question number 2, if Y is immediately after S, so essentially, if we have Y immediately after S, so essentially we get an SY block. Well, if we have an SY block, first of all, it's worth noting the second template wouldn't work, right? Because Y here has to go first. So if we have an SY block, it would have to be in the top template, and then we would end up with essentially S in 1 and Y in 2, and I guess 3 would have to be B1, and then the rest of it just follows through. So really, this just turns into an SY B1 block. And then the rest of it, as we said, just kind of follows template A. So, let's see. That's probably enough information. The question asks what now would have to happen. Answer choice A, R is in 4th. Well, R and N are still flexible, so that doesn't have to be true. B, S is in 2. And no, in fact, S would have to be in 1. That's just outright false. Next, C, Y is 1st. No, Y is 2nd, if anything. D, the second break is in the 5th hour. And no, the second break is actually currently in the 6th hour. Answer choice E, the first break is in the 3rd hour, and yeah, B1 would have landed in position 3. The best answer to question 2 is E. Next, question number 3, which of the following could occur during the 5th hour? Well, I suppose we already have the answer to that, right? Because no matter what, it's going to be one of your kind of the RN split. So either R or N, and we have N, we don't have R. The best answer to question number 3 is E. Next, question 4. If S is immediately before the second break, so I guess we don't really need this anymore. If S is immediately before the second break, what does that effectively tell? Well, actually, I guess that just forces us into template number 2 over here, right? It would have to be this bottom one. And everything else is kind of locked in place except for the RN, which is still going to be flexible. So let's go. The question asks, which of the following now could be true? A, N goes into 3. No, that's already S. Next, N goes into 6. Actually, maybe these guys can still kind of flip back and forth, right? So B potentially could have worked. Let's hold on to this one. Just in case, let's take a quick look at the rest. R is in 4, and no, that has to be our second break at the moment. Next, S is in 4, and no, S has to currently be in 3. And then Y is in 2, and no, Y is currently in 1. So yeah, best answer to question number 4 is B. Next, question number 5. Which of the following must be true? All right, let's take a look. Answer choice A, N is immediately after the first break. And I mean, well, no, because first of all, they could be immediately after the second break, and even then they get split, so it doesn't have to be N who is immediately after. Answer choice B, N is immediately after the second break. Same problem, R and N can always flip, so neither of them really has to be immediately after anything. Answer choice C, R is sometime before the second break. And no, we could, in this template, have them after, so that didn't have to be true. Answer choice D, S is before the second break. Actually, yeah, that one always happens no matter what. Here, S is explicitly before the second break, but even here, S is going to land somewhere in the first 3, which is way before the second break. So answer choice D, S does have to go at some point before the second break. Best answer to number 5 is that one. Just in case, though, let's take a look at E. Y is immediately before the first break. And, I mean, that could happen, but it doesn't have to, because in the top template, you could have had Y, S, and then the first break. So once again, best answer is D. Lastly, question number 6, what must be true? Let's go. Answer choice A, N is at some time before R. And again, no, R and N can flip back and forth at all times, right? So they certainly don't have to go in any particular sequence. Answer choice B, N is at some point before S. Wait, what? No, that never happens. S is before both of them, right? So that's not going to work. Answer choice C, R is before Y. Does R have to go before Y? And wait, no, I don't think it can. Because R and N, the split is always after the Y, no matter which way you go here. So that certainly doesn't have to be true. Answer choice D, Y is before N. Does that have to be true? And there it is. Yeah, you'll notice that no matter what, Y ends up before the Rn block, whether it's in one of these 3 positions or over here where it's in first. So best answer to number 6 is D. Just in case, though, let's take a look at E. Y is before S, and no, because we could have started over here with S, and then you could have had Y be 1. So Y didn't have to go before S. So once again, best answer is D.